Okay, so that's recording. Share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, welcome everyone to today's webinar, which is all around producer demonstration sites and MLA's open call. My name is Julie Petty and I work with MLA as the Goat Industry Project Manager. I'm joined today by Russell Pattinson, who's the National Coordinator for the PDS program. I should say that this is a re-recording of the webinar that we held live on the 5th of October. We had some issues with the original recording, so we're redoing it and we will address the questions that came up during the live webinar. So before we hop into the producer demonstration site content, I just wanted to give you a really quick overview of what MLA is. And we obviously work with red meat producers across Australia looking to drive profitability, sustainability and global competitiveness. We assist in funding, research, development and adoption programs along with marketing projects as well. You may not be aware, but you are not necessarily automatically a Meat and Livestock Australia member. It is free to sign up, and if anyone has any questions about doing that, just get in touch with myself or hop online to the MLA website where you can sign up for free. In terms of our industry structure, we work directly with peak industry councils for the various industries, so goat meat, sheep meat and cattle. And we are part of a number of RDCs who work directly with those, including LiveCorp and AMPC, for example. So, without further ado, I'll now hand the presentation over to Russell to give us a bit of an overview of the Producer Demonstration Site program. Russell, over to you.
Thanks very much, Julie, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for your interest in the PDS program and for attending this webinar. Look, we're not going to present anything that's new or different today. All of the things we're going to cover you can readily read on the website or download various documents, whether they be guidelines for PDS, monitoring, evaluation, reporting frameworks, application forms, etc. But we just thought that it was worthwhile having this webinar so as to perhaps clarify some various areas, provide some opportunities for questions, and also to give you the best chance of putting in a good application. I'd like to just emphasise, and I'll do this a couple of times during the day, the webinar, that this is a preliminary application. So we're talking about a maximum of 3 pages total. So it's not an arduous, long application process. It's an initial response. What we want to emphasise is that try to, if you possibly can, keep it very direct and clear rather than particularly complex. These programs aren't ones that they're not research programs, so we're looking at very clear applications through the process. Julie's going to help me through the slides, so Julie, if you wouldn't mind, the next slide, please. This is what we're going to cover today that you'll be able to see on your screen. Please, there'll be 2 or 3 times during the course of the discussion we will have a break for questions, but please don't hesitate to interrupt at any time. You do that by just hitting your chat button on your screen. So what we're going to cover today very simply is the application process for preliminary application, what is a PDS, and equally what it's not. And then we'll have some questions. We'll cover the key dates for this open call process. We'll provide some information about what to cover in your application, and then we'll have a break at that stage about some more questions. Then we'll just cover on not so much common mistakes, but things that people find a little bit confusing through the application, and some things that tripped people up the last open call that we had. So just trying to clarify some of those. And then we'll talk about what are the activities that are eligible for funding and, of course, what activities aren't. So in terms of, thanks, Julie. So in terms of the application process, as I've mentioned before, this is a preliminary application. So we'll get into the dates in a second, but by and large, preliminary applications come in, they're assessed by a senior group within MLA. A number are picked out to be progressed to a full application, and others on this occasion may not make muster. But please, if you don't necessarily get through the preliminary application process, don't be too disheartened, because we only have a limited number of projects available, probably about 6 for sheep and about 2 for goats. Unfortunately, this time we don't have funding available for beef PDS projects. So please don't be too downhearted if you don't get through the first time. It will be as much about the limitation of funding as it is about necessarily your particular application. Also, just re-emphasising, please keep it to 3 pages maximum. That's going to be really important.
I should add to Russell that it was quite a competitive process during the last open call with, I think, close to 30 different preliminary applications. So we do review those quite against the selection criteria that's noted in the background reading and so forth, and the terms of reference for the PDS program. So we do look at them quite closely in relation to those and provide, we endeavour to provide useful feedback back to all the applicants as quickly as possible to assist you in either putting together your full application or, some, I guess, improvements that might be able to be considered for the next open call potentially.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. It's a really good point. And could I just add perhaps to that we tend to go fairly hard on the preliminary applications if, for example, we've got 6 sheep and 2 goat ones, and we have, as we did last time, something like 25 to 30 applications, we won't pick out 15 or 18 preliminary applications to put people through the trouble, if you like, of going through a full application process, which is a little bit more detailed than the preliminary application, of course, only to then find out that only half of those people get up. So we would tend to cull fairly hard, and we might come out with 10 or 11, something like that, so that the chances of people, when they've got going from a preliminary to being asked to go to a full application, they're certainly not guaranteed complete success, but their chances of success are quite substantially increased, if that makes sense. Thanks, Julie. So what is a PDS? First and foremost is it needs to be initiated by a producer group. Now that could be an existing group, an existing productivity group, or a lifetime year management group, or any sort of group that might already exist in your neck of the woods. And that group has a desire to address a key adoption issue that's currently limiting enterprise productivity and profitability. It also needs to be of sufficient interest to a number of the people that they're prepared to demonstrate whatever this new technology or knowledge is, prepared to demonstrate on 3 to 5, preferably more, different properties and at a commercially relevant scale. So that's running demonstration programs of whatever the particular approach that your PDS is looking at on certainly a lot more than one, and certainly a lot more than just at a pilot small scale. We're looking for some commercially relevant scale here. You should have a core group of producers that are directly involved in the project. We'd suggest that should be a minimum of probably 10. Of the 10, 3 to 5 to 8, whatever the case might be running demonstrations on their property. The others would be actively involved in the project, whether that be from the management committee point of view or assisting with measurement taking, monitoring, etc. So key to have a core group of producers directly involved in the project. And then, of course, we expect that there will be a larger network of producers that we call observers in this case, that would be keen to attend workshops or field days to learn more about the outcomes of the project as it progresses. So, for example, there might be a producer group, a productivity group for example, and we've got a number of these, of course, scattered around the country that might have a couple of hundred producers involved, or it might have 20. But we'd expect that there might be 8 or 10 of that would be part of the core group of producers for the project, really hands-on, actively involved, and I'll touch on that in a second, with the remaining, let's say, if there's 200, with the remaining 190 that are pretty keen to attend workshops, field days, etc. Thanks, Julie. Those core producers that I mentioned, and I've touched on this before, they'll be responsible for much of the in-field activities. So running the demonstration projects, undertaking the measurements, doing the stock rotations or whatever the case may be. We have had in the past some applications that aren't necessarily favourably looked upon where a facilitator, and we'll touch on what that means in a sec, but the facilitator does everything. They organise the trial, they manage the trial, they take all of the measurements, and then at the end they provide the group with the outcomes. That's not what this PDS project is about. We're looking for very much more hands-on participation and guidance from the facilitator. We'll come back to that in a second. PDSs are not research, not for research funding. There's other options within MLA to undertake research where you're trying to scientifically identify a solution to a problem. This is about saying, okay, we know that there's some new science, new technology, new knowledge that might be available but hasn't been well adopted for whatever reason. And therefore, these are about saying, okay, how can we try to demonstrate some of these in commercial settings so as to increase the adoption of this. One, for example, it's a current PDS, and I'm not singling it out as for any reason other than as an example, is the application of sort of worm boss in a particular area was less than what was thought, and so therefore there's a PDS to try and encourage a large number of producers to really fully engage and understand the process of that. The other part is that we're talking about demonstrations on the paddock scale or whatever the case may be. It's really important to use controls. So if you're testing a new forage type or you're testing a new approach to increase condition score or reproductive performance, it's important that we have some data that we can compare to see what are the costs and benefits of the new approach over the existing approaches. So controls are an important part of your method. Thanks, Julie. As I mentioned before, all PDSs should have a suitably skilled facilitator that somebody external to the group, well, maybe not external to the group, but certainly somebody that can guide the group activity. They can coordinate the extension. They can follow the methods and the protocols to ensure that the PDS is doing what it said it would do so as to give it the best opportunity to get the correct results. So that skilled facilitator would most likely, I don't need to give examples of who they are because you'll all know them, but those within the group will be really important part of it. But please don't assume or put in your proposal that the facilitator is going to do everything. It's got to be far hands-on, as mentioned before. The last two parts I'll just touch on briefly, but in the preliminary applications, could you please, it's really important for us to extend and communicate the outcomes of these PDSs, not to just the 10 or 8 or 10 or whatever the case may be, people in the core group, but to a broader range of people, so that this is levy money being used, and therefore we want to try and extend the outcomes from these projects as wide as we possibly can. That could be, for example, to the observer groups, the others in the productivity group, for example, that come along to field days, etc. Or indeed it could be to the broader red meat producer population. And you might do things like putting ads in, or not ads, but articles in local newspapers, sending things through to MLA to put into their e-newsletters and also some of their hard copy communication vehicles. So please keep that in mind. We're not looking for it in detail, as I'll mention in a minute, in the actual preliminary application, but it is really important to give some thought about how you're going to extend the outcomes of this work to the broader group than just the 10 people, let's say, who are operating in it. Equally importantly is a monitoring, evaluation and reporting. All that means is, what have we done and what's the outputs and the outcomes that have been achieved. So has there been improvements in producer knowledge? CASA stands for just knowledge, attitudes, skills and aspirations. So has there been a change in producer knowledge as a result of having this PDS run, or have their skills increased? And we can do that easily through surveys, etc. Equally importantly, if not more, is has there been practice change? So has this demonstration project actually resulted in both core and also broader areas changing the practices? And if they have, what is the benefit to individual businesses and to industry from those changes? So again, trying to capture data that we can use more broadly than just that core group. Thanks, Julie. Perhaps we could take some questions now if you think this is an appropriate time.
Sure. Okay, so some of the questions that we received during the live webinar was just in relation to how often we hold the PDS open calls. So generally we try and hold those twice annually and try and align those with sort of the starts of seasons and so forth, so it makes sense on the ground. We had another question relating to funding for the facilitator role and what that sort of looks like. So perhaps you might be able to elaborate on that a little bit, Russell?
Yeah, look, the facilitator, they might be a private consultant, they might be a state government operator, who knows? They would be paid for their time, for their expertise on a daily rate. So you should put in that, what is the expected number of days that's going to be involved in this project and how much their daily rate will be, so that can be part of the budget. But we certainly see that they're an important part of the project. They're obviously an important part of the budget. But I just say again that we're probably not expecting that the whole 100% of the budget will be allocated to the facilitator because there's a lot of other things such as the conduct of the demonstration, extension and communication activities, perhaps even monitoring and evaluations part that will also travel, which will also take some parts of the budget component.
Yep. And I suppose it's also worth reiterating in terms of the subject matter for the PDS applications and so forth. Obviously, that is driven by the producer group involved, but there's also, I suppose, from an MLA perspective, some alignment to the SAMRAC-MORWAC priorities that are listed as part of the background reading and reference documents for the PDS open call. And that certainly, in reading through those, wouldn't limit the number of or type of issue you want to tackle in your PDS, but that's something that we'll be considering as well as we evaluate the projects and look at those. So, Russell, did you want
exactly
me to...
right.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks, Julie. I'll pick that up. I'll pick that up in this next part as well.
Yep.
Can we move on, perhaps? Okay. Sorry, I probably jumped to the question a bit early. What is not a PDS is probably an equally important question. What it's not is it's not an issue that's of really limited interest to producers in an area. We're looking to have work done on something that's really of interest to a number of people in a particular area. It's not basic or applied research that we want to identify a solution to a problem that we just don't know what it is. So there's other parts within MLA that look after R&D. This is not one of those. It's not looking at trying to find solutions to something that we don't know about. It is about, however, demonstrating commercial technologies, how they operate and perform, and how they can have an impact on business profit or productivity or decision-making value. We also don't. It's not about can commercial technologies actually perform. So, for example, can electronic identification does it actually work? Well, that's up to the manufacturer to make that investment to see if it works. What we'd be looking at is how do you apply that technology, for example, in a sheep or cattle, sheep or goat enterprise. And we're also looking at, as mentioned before, it's not just demonstration on just a small number of properties, one or two, and we'd like it at a commercial scale, not just at a little pilot's trial focus. And as mentioned before, we're not expecting the poor old facilitator to have to do everything. They're a key component to it, but it's also very much hands-on. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Julie. Okay, this is just a copy of the application form in 3 or 4 slides. It's very simple. I mentioned before it's a preliminary application, so it's not something that's terribly detailed. This first part is very straightforward, just group names, what's the title of your project, main contact person, etc. How many members have you got in the group, and where are they located? And we'd like you to just give a very brief overview as to the reason why this group exists, what are their main areas of interest, and how long ago did they form, and was it specifically for this project or was it already established? So it's just a little bit of detail, just in 3 or 4 or 5 lines, not expansive, as to what the purpose and the role of your group is and what's its membership base, etc. Thanks, Julie. The next one is in relation to the application process. So this is about, there's 3 parts here, but first of all, what's the challenge? And we like you to try and be as clear as you possibly can about what's the problem that you're trying to address, how big an impact has it currently got, and we're not expecting chapter and verse on that. How many people does it impact in your region, and is it being addressed at now? And if so, what's the outcome, and what's the new approach that you're trying to suggest? As Julie mentioned, we're trying to align these problems or challenges back to the SAMRAC and WALRAC priorities. Now, that's just South Australian meat research priorities and similarly the Western Australian livestock research priorities. You can obtain a copy on the MLA PDS part of the website. There's 2 documents you can just easily download which provide summaries of those 2 target type areas. So we'd like you to have a look at those and just if you can, relate your problem to some of those priorities. The next part is about what's the objective of your project, and I know a number of you will be very familiar with what's called SMART objectives. All that means is that just use terms or words that give a very clear and quantifiable definition, if you like, of what you're trying to achieve. So SMART just means specific, be measurable, achievable, relevant, time-based. The achievable and relevant are turned around in different parts to other words, but by and large they all mean the same thing. So it's just saying, and I'll give you an example in a minute, of being quite objective, if I can use that term, in how you describe what you're trying to achieve in the project. The final one is the proposed methodology, and again we'll give some examples of this in a minute, but just pretty well you can put in dot points as to how you're going to undertake your project and describe what you'll do, and give us a clear indication of its ability to be able to answer the challenge or the problem that you've got. So that's what the method would look at. And also, I'll mention later again, but it should cover our control so that we can compare it to current existing practices. Thanks, Julie.
I suppose the only other thing to add there too is that it might sound quite obvious, but making sure that your method aligns with what your objective is and what you're looking to measure and monitor there, and being careful, I suppose, not to overstretch yourself in terms of both the time that you've got for the project and also the budget by trying to, I suppose, be all things to all people and bite off more than you might be able to chew in the project. So.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Really important point, because we know, and we'll get onto the budget in a minute, but these are not huge projects. They're good because it's $25,000 per year for 3 years that's available, but that won't go an enormous way. So we're asking people to be very focused in what they're trying to achieve, and as you just perfectly described, not to overextend yourself in these processes. Okay. The next one I'll just touch on really quickly. I mentioned it before. Just give us some indications in the application form about what are you going to do in terms of communication and extension to get the message out to not only your core group but to a broader group, which might be the observers of the project, or it might be red meat producers more broadly. And equally, we'll value some indicators of what monitoring, evaluation and reporting you'll do, so that you'll be, for example, using perhaps some simple surveys at the start of the project and at the end to measure how producers' knowledge or skills have changed as a result of it, how their practices might have changed as a result of it, and capturing data to look at what might be the costs and benefits of this approach, so that we can relay that information to a broader audience as well. Then the final part of the application form. Thanks, Julie.
Do you mind, Russell, if I just quickly add there that I suppose we don't need war and peace in this section. This is just for the preliminary application, but clearly it's something, if you're going to proceed to full application, you need to start thinking about from the onset. And certainly things like the communication and the monitoring and evaluation, we're not looking to impose, a really onerous process onto the project facilitators or the project group. But both of these things are activities or processes that would benefit both the producer group in demonstrating the value you're adding and demonstrating the impact of the change or whatever that you're looking at in your PDS, but it's also about, for MLA, demonstrating that value of the levy investment and, looking at things like, including case studies where you're detailing how people, the impact and so forth might be one way to help address things like the comms as well as the monitoring and evaluation, and looking at things like intention to change and intended and unintended impacts and so forth. So,
Yep.
Sorry, moving on to the next
Great.
slide.
Thanks, Julie. Look, the last part of the application form is just the budget. And all we're asking here is for you to just itemise some of the key amounts that you think will be required. We do sometimes get applications where it just says $75,000 over 3 years and no indication of how that would be spent. They're not overly well received. So we'd just like you to simply sort of say, well, what are the salaries? So that's probably the type of role before I was discussing about the facilitator, that being paid for their time. What are some of the operating costs? And that could be things like running field days, having field walks, for example. Might be something to do with the actual establishment of the demonstration trials, and then there's potentially some travel areas within that. One of the things, I'll just jump in now, and this is just to remind me to come back to it later. One of the things is that for people who are successful, there will be a need to put in a travel budget for a trip to Sydney, because one of the things for all successful PDS is that they get a day's training on monitoring and evaluation. So we find that is very useful, and not only is it a day training about monitoring and evaluation, but you actually start to prepare your M&E project as well, M&E for your project as well. So we'll come back to that in a second. Then we're also really keen to see, have you been able to secure, or do you expect to be able to secure some sponsorship? Now, that might be from a seed company, an animal health company, for some of the inputs into your proposal. That's always looked upon favourably. And also keep in mind that producers operating in these projects, they've got to put a lot of their own time and resources into it as well. So that really needs to be recognised. So again, we don't expect a precise science here to the dollar and cent, but please give us an indication of the in-kind support from particularly the core producers that are involved in the project. Thanks, Julie. Some key dates. Okay. The open call kicked off on the 21st of September. Applications closed on the 21st of October. That is a date that does need to be stuck to, so please get your applications in on time. We'll get feedback back to everybody pretty quickly by the 4th of November. So that will be to people who have been successful in being asked to go to a full application. And it'll also, of course, be to people with some guidance. It'll also be to people that have missed out, again, with some guidance as to what, if there's particular reasons why you weren't successful on this occasion. But as I mentioned, demand will outstrip supply, we believe. So some of it will be we just haven't got enough money to go around. You'll then have a period of about 3 weeks to complete your final application. They need to be submitted then by the 25th of November. And then we'll have, we hope, a quick turnaround, less than a couple of weeks, to notify applicants of who's been successful in securing PDS funding for the project and who hasn't. As I mentioned, people that get asked to fill out a full application are not guaranteed success of getting their PDS off the ground, but certainly their chances of their probability of success has increased substantially. Then we'll go into a process with these projects of undertaking contracts. That can take a little while, particularly around that time of the year when you're sort of running into Christmas, early January. Our main target is to make sure that we're ready to start at some stage early in the new year, and for a lot of projects it's more likely to be at that sort of end summer, early autumn period. There's some times when a number of these sort of projects really start to come into their own. So that's the schedule of dates going forward. The key one being at this stage that the open call closes on the 21st of October.
Cool. Thanks,
Julie. Look, I'll probably go through these quite quickly because we've covered some of them in the past. These are just a little bit some examples that you can use just to give you a feel. Please don't think that they're you have to follow every word, but it just gives you an idea of the sort of things. When we're saying what's the challenge or problem, just give us a feel of what it is that's limiting productivity or profitability in your area, and which there are some new ideas that might be able to be tested to change that situation. This is an example of some people in a sort of mixed farming area that are having some trouble with condition scores, which is impacting on reproductive rate. They're saying, well, our current forage options aren't real flash or as good as we'd hope. We've heard about some people having some success in using a grazing canola, but not many people are keen to have not many people have trialled it out. So we wanted to test whether or not dual-purpose canola can increase some pre-joining live weights, condition scores, and thus reproductive rates of use. And then maybe even you might be able to harvest this in its second year to produce a seed oil crop. So that's sort of just trying to give a feel of what the problem is and what the opportunity might be to address that problem. Thanks, Julie. In terms then of the... Oops, the wrong way. In terms then of the objective, and I mentioned about trying to put it into smart terms, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-based. The example below just gives a bit of sort of an example. If you had that sort of project, an objective might be by saying, look, by December 2017 in a particular part of Victoria, we're going to demonstrate and assess whether a couple of different varieties of dual-purpose canola can actually increase live weight gains from X to Y, can change condition score from such and such, and can increase reproductive rate. It might be measured by preg scanning. So they're the sort of things. If you had that in your objectives, then obviously you're going to need to condition score you use. You're going to need to measure live weight gains, and you're going to need to scan. You use preg scan them as well. So that gives an indication of what we're trying to achieve, and it also leads directly into what are some of the measurements that we're going to need to take. The second part of the objective then is in terms of undertaking a fairly simple cost-benefit analysis to determine what are some of the relative economic performance of the canola variety. Thanks, Julie. Again, what we've touched on the method, just keep it fairly simple, but make sure, as Julie said, it relates back to the objective. So it might be, say, okay, we're going to identify the core producers and the observers. We're going to form a management committee. We're going to identify who our facilitator is. We're going to identify how often we're going to meet, etc. We're going to do some demonstration on these particular properties in this particular area, and we'll include some controls. These are the animal measurements, and when we're going to take some of these measurements through it, this is how we're going to undertake sort of results analysis to try and get the message out both during and at the end. We'll have a couple of field days or field walks or whatever the case may be. And then here we'll also undertake communication extension activities, and we'll be measuring the impact of this project as we go along. So just something sort of fairly simple like that. Again, I'll race over this perhaps. Communication extension strategies. What are you going to do to achieve adoption of the results with the core producers? How are you going to promote the outcomes to what we call observers and also the wider producer community? Might be field walks, it might be a field day, sorry, it might be farm walks. It could be management meetings. It'll be articles from producer group newsletters or local papers, press releases, articles for MLA, etc. And then the final one on monitoring and evaluation. Please don't be worried about monitoring, evaluation, reporting. It is and needs to be quite simple, but it's really saying, what did we do? So what are the inputs that we put into it? Dollars, participants, what data did we get? How well did we do it? So what are the changes to producer knowledge or skills? Has it changed what people do? Have people changed their practices as a result of the PDS? If they have, is anybody better off? What's the costs and benefits from making these changes? Not only during the course of the project, but you might say, look, we should come back to these people 12 months or 2 years down the track and see what they're still doing. And that's something that MLA would follow up. We don't expect you to rejoin or get the group back together in 2 or 3 years' time after you've completed to undertake that work. But it's something that MLA is very keen to monitor going forward. And then, of course, what could the impact of this change be at the broader industry level if you were to apply, for example, in this one in other mixed farming areas around the state or indeed the country? Okay. Any questions, Julie, perhaps at this stage?
Russell, I suppose, like to add to that, to say that certainly we would provide some advice and assistance to people in developing up their communications plan and the monitoring and evaluation. And the workshop that you need to attend in Sydney to look at the MER training is not just sort of sitting there getting an overdose of theory or anything like that. It's very practical, and you'd be sitting there actually starting on and developing up your own monitoring and evaluation plan for the project. So, that's certainly something we're trying to make really nice and practical for people. One of the questions we got was in relation to seeking approval from ethics committees and so forth for any animal measurements that might be undertaken as part of the PDSs. And our view would be that that's part of the applicant's role to seek that out and get those approvals sorted out for the project. The other question was in relation to if there's a number of producer groups in a particular state who are interested in putting together perhaps a joint application or something like that, how that might work and whether or not that would be favourably received. And I think our response to that, Russell, was that certainly that leverage would be very useful in terms of the communication aspect of getting the results of the PDS out to those various producer groups across the state. But it would be something we'd probably need to discuss in more detail with about those individual projects to ensure there's not too much, I suppose, scope creep there and you're biting off more than you can chew trying to please perhaps the different views or needs of those various groups, but certainly something we'd talk through with those individuals, I think.
Yeah.
So I think that brings us on to the next slide there, Russell.
Thanks, Julie. This is just to pitch what are some of the common mistakes or things that perhaps won't necessarily enhance your opportunity to get from a preliminary application to a full application. And these we've touched on through the course of the last hour. The first one is that it's research. It's trying to discover a solution to a problem that we don't know what the answer is. There's other opportunities for R&D via MLAs and not PDSs. There are too few demonstrations. It's just on one property, or it might be just on very small plots. It might be completely facilitator driven, where the poor facilitator is left to do all of the work, and it might be that they get all of the budget as well. So we're conscious of the fact that we want to try and make this very hands-on and learning experience for producers as well. Please don't overcomplicate it. Julie just mentioned this right now. It's an attractive amount of money to help a group to do some things that they've been keen to explore, but it's not sufficient to undertake a huge program across sites all over a particular state, for example. Please spend a bit of time on your objective. Just make sure it's really nice and clear and succinct. Again, don't overcomplicate it. Don't try to do too much. The method, again, keep it pretty simple but clear, and make sure, as Julie said before, that you relate it back to what the objective is, so that the method looks like it's going to provide the correct information. Again, we've touched on the fact that don't leave communication and monitoring and evaluation just as an afterthought. Please give it some thought as you're putting your preliminary application in. Another mistake, and I mentioned this before, is that you just have one line item, $75,000 over 3 years or $25,000 a year. We need more than just that simple amount. Don't feel you don't need to put in for $25,000 a year. If you can do these, obviously, for more targeted less, that would be also favourably looked at. And the final one is please give some consideration to in-kind. Often some applications in the past haven't attempted to look at that. So that's just some of the things that we'd say, hey, look, this might, you might be able to guard against and enhance your chances.
And certainly something like in-kind can very quickly add up too. So the producer contributions can be quite significant there. So I guess don't overlook that. Absolutely.
Okay, so what can be funded, as we've mentioned a couple of times, up to $25,000 per year for 3 years. The funding can be used for the facilitator's time and expenses, operational aspects of the demonstration that we touched on before. It could be used for extension and communication activities, running field days, preparing articles, etc. And it can also, of course, be used for the conduct of the monitoring and evaluation component of your project, along with making sure that you keep in mind that you will be expected, if you're successful, to have a day trip to Sydney for training for monitoring and evaluation. And as Julie said, very hands-on. You'll actually end up with a vast part of your M&E plan already produced when you leave that meeting. What are some of the things that won't be funded? We won't fund purchase of capital items, let's say sets of scales, for example, because it just gets awkward and messy, either selling it or who owns it at the end. So we expect those would be shared or leased or some other way or maybe even sponsored by somebody if you haven't got direct access to it right at the start. We don't fund, or MLA doesn't fund, items where there's significant private benefit. For example, a producer getting all of his flock DNA tested. And also, we don't pay for the purchase of animals for the similar reason to the capital items listed above. The budget, again, covered this, I think. Don't complicate it, but we would like at least line items indicated in the preliminary application for salaries, operating, travel, and, as Julie mentioned, keep in mind the in-kind, either sponsorship for some of the operating resources, drench or whatever the case may be, and also in-kind for producer time and resources. Julie, that's about it. I'm happy to some contact details there you might like to touch on in a sec, but also happy to have some questions. I think the final thing I'd say is that apart from the fact that applications are due on the 21st of October, certainly myself and Julie are more than happy to take calls or emails or whatever the case may be to answer any questions that you might have and help you to put your best foot forward in terms of these PDS applications. So we make that offer to everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Russell. And look, please hop along and check out those reference documents and so forth on the MLA website in relation to the PDS open call. They're all there to assist you in putting together your applications, and give us a call if you need anything clarified. But otherwise, that wraps up the webinar for today, Russell. Thanks very much for your time, and we're really excited and looking forward to seeing some pretty cool applications coming through on the open call.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And just can I thank everybody again for their interest in coming along and listening to the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much.